Anthony Mason had spent his childhood doing nothing but stealing things. By the age of 25, he had mastered the art of stealing. He had become such an expert that he would meet someone for a few seconds, and that person would always lose something to him. He would shake hands with others and take off their costly watches and chains without even giving them a hint. He was a con artist who was successful at fooling the cops as well, a brilliant but dirty mind. Yet the cops were never able to locate him. His skill had left no trace, and he had eventually become so proficient at it that he knew exactly who to rob on which day. If he hadn't been cautious, he could have been behind the bars long ago. The police hunted for him in the streets of London, but he was a ghost, never within reach of the police. He was planning for his second greatest theft in the mobile market. The first theft was in a shopping center where he had stolen jewels and successfully glided through the crowd. And why should he not be successful? After all, he had spent the entire 3 months planning this theft in a shopping mall. He had visited the mall twice, and his computerized memory took note of every little detail, from the number of shops to the number of windows, parking lots, their timings, and every detail that a good thief should be aware of. The most important thing of all was to keep the police out of the game as much as possible. He had planned the exact location where he wanted the stolen goods to be hidden, and then the time they would be taken away. If he failed to do everything right, he didn't want the policeman or anyone else to find it. He slipped out of the car as inconspicuously as possible and walked into the shopping mall. There were hundreds of people, some dressed in casual wear while others in fancy suits. He was dressed in a black suit, wearing a watch and black sunglasses that made his personality stand out. He entered the shop from where he had to steal the most precious ring. He made sure not to move too quickly. He had to keep his cool. He went to the counter, behind which a middle-aged woman was standing. After waiting for a moment, he pretended to examine the ring.
"Can you show me that ring?"
Anthony Mason asked, pointing towards another ring on the mirror shelf. As soon as the woman turned to get the ring, he quickly replaced it with a fake ring of the same design. He reached into his pockets, pretending to look for something. He looked around and slipped the ring in. He was standing at such an angle that his hand wasn't visible on the camera. The woman showed him the ring.
"My wife won't like it. I will check some other shops."
He passed a smile and turned to exit the shop. He took a deep breath to calm himself. How long would it take her to notice the fake one? It could take hours, and he had become such an expert that even these few hours were enough to keep him hidden. The next day, the news of the heist made headlines as it was the most precious ring. The thief had outsmarted the police and security cameras in the city square. His first big heist was a success, and it had given him the confidence to go for more. And so it began. He robbed banks, restaurants, and parks. No one noticed him leaving and entering places. The police were still looking for his hideouts, but there were no signs of him. He continued to steal valuable objects and jewelry, even though evading capture was becoming increasingly difficult. He wanted to spend his life in peace, for he was sick of running. But he had forgotten one simple rule that is instilled into every criminal's mind. Make sure you never get caught. 5 years had passed, and he had escaped the police. He had bought a beautiful house near the countryside. He was wanted, and the police had searched for him everywhere. Many a time, he nearly escaped from the police, just like a ghost who becomes invisible. He had changed his appearance, even his name, Fiver Miles Mason. And as much as he hated the new identity, it made life easier. Nobody would know who he was, especially if the person didn't know who he actually was. He had no family, no parents. He sat by his bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about his previous life. He tried to remember the days when he used to live as Anthony Mason, a young man with only 2 dreams, a future of wealth, a career, and fame. Now when he had got it all, he knew better. Money was worthless for a rich man. He closed his eyes, trying to fall asleep. He felt the exhaustion creeping on his body, but he refused to succumb and finally managed to fall asleep. A scream woke him up, and he rushed to the window. He looked outside the window and saw a dark figure standing in the streetlight. The figure disappeared, and Anthony sensed some danger. A burglar. Was he stupid enough to try and steal his belongings? Or was he planning on robbing him? He went downstairs, grabbed a knife, and opened the door. As he stepped outside, there was no one but complete silence. It was dangerous in the middle of the night. He decided to sleep and let it go, but it seemed impossible to do so. He lay down and kept tossing and turning in bed. After a couple of restless nights, he managed to sleep peacefully. When he woke up, the sun was shining brightly in the room. He felt slightly nauseous and wondered what the hell happened last night. Maybe a nightmare. He threw his legs over the side of the bed, getting ready to stand up. Then a thought struck him. Why hadn't his alarm gone off this morning? That wasn't the only strange thing he noticed about yesterday. All the windows that faced the street were wide open, and the clothes from the cupboard were thrown out and scattered on the floor. What was going on here? There was no one around. Even if there had been, no one would have been brave enough to climb through the windows. Anthony stood in disbelief. Whoever had broken into his house had probably fled to avoid being arrested. It was late afternoon before Anthony could calm himself down. The intruder was driving him nuts. Who was he and where did he come from? He checked the security cameras outside his home, but the cameras didn't catch any intruders. That intruder must be hiding somewhere, and he might be planning on hurting me, Anthony. He would surely come after me. A thought came to his mind. The following night, Anthony made sure to lock all the doors and windows. He kept a revolver by his bedside for his security, and made sure that security cameras were functioning properly. He didn't sleep much the next few nights, but none of these precautions seemed to make any difference. In the morning, he would find his things scattered on the floor. His paranoia grew by the moment. What was going to happen next? Would he get murdered in his sleep? He didn't feel safe. He slept very little.
What is the solution? What shall I do? Call the cops? Nay, it won't be safe to call the cops,
he murmured to himself. His past prevented him from taking the help of the cops. He left the house and made a small hut near the suburbs. He stayed silent for some more weeks, only coming home for meals and to shower. He dreaded that whoever had done all this damage might kill him before the police arrived. Calling the police was the only option for him. He kept thinking about how to deal with the situation. He couldn't afford to lose his property and be locked up. Though he had changed his appearance a lot, he feared that police might recognize him. In addition, if he called the police, he will have to go through the investigation process. He didn't want to ask too many questions and reveal himself. He didn't want to expose his identity. After much reflection, he decided to call the cops.
Hey, this is 5 Miles Mason speaking. I fear a burglar tried to break into my house.
Anthony gave his address and a description of the intruder. He asked the officer if he would be able to check the place for evidence.
Sure, we'll check the place out as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, officer,
Anthony said, ending the call. That should be enough, Anthony thought. After all, he had changed his appearance a lot and was now a middle-aged man named 5 Miles Mason. Hardly 20 minutes had passed when he heard the sirens of the police mobile. The police had arrived at his place. They checked his place thoroughly and investigated the neighbors, but didn't find anything suspicious.
What time did the thief break into your home?
At night, around 1 a.m.
Anthony answered.
Did you see him?
Said the police official.
No, but I noticed a shadow from my window. He was about 6 feet tall.
Anthony replied.
Any other details?
Inquired the officer.
No,
Anthony said.
Fine, we have got fingerprints. We will reach out to you soon,
said the officer. Anthony nodded in agreement.
Are you really all right, Mr. Mason? You seem quite shaken up,
said the officer.
Yes. Thank you very much, officer. I'll call you for help if needed,
Anthony said while locking the door. The rest of the evening went smoothly, and Anthony relaxed. There hadn't been any trouble since yesterday, and he hoped it would stay that way. It wouldn't be good to attract attention. After having dinner, he took a bath. His door knocked. Outside the door, police officials were standing.
"We have located the burglar. Would you like to know his name?"
said the officer.
Yes.
Anthony answered with hesitation. He couldn't let anyone suspect him. After all, he was involved in heists. The authorities wouldn't take kindly on him stealing their treasure.
"Anthony Mason."
A shiver went down his spine.
"I'm very sorry, Mr. Mason,"
said the officer.
"but your fingerprints were all over your house. We examined security camera footage only to find out that you were the burglar. Probably you have some psychological problems."
Psychological problems.
Anthony stared at him in disbelief.
"Yes, no burglar broke into your house. You would wake up in your sleep and toss everything away."
The police officer took a little pause.
"Besides that, we have arrest warrants for you."
For me,
said Anthony.
"Yes, we checked your fingerprints. We couldn't believe that you were the most wanted criminal."
The police officer stated as he handcuffed him. Anthony was trapped in the same thing he was running from for years.